All right. Hello, everybody. Welcome back to week 2 for the Come Read With Me book club as we go through Design for How People Learn. We're so excited to be with all of you guys again today. So, we're going to go ahead and introduce our wonderful co hosts and our wonderful chat moderators that will be with you today. So, we're going to start with Mary. Go ahead.
Hi, everybody. My name is Barry. I am relatively new to the L&D space. I am an instructional designer for a startup, and I'm super happy to be here.
Awesome. Can you guys tell people where you're from as well?
Florida!
Hey, me too. All right, Dr. Cropper.
Hello, I'm Dr. Max Cropper, and I'm the president and CEO of 5-Star Performance Solutions. I teach best practice instructional strategies, performance improvement, and leadership development. I have a master's and doctorate in instructional design.
Awesome.
For,
So great to have
40 years of experience.
Amazing. So great to have you here. Thank you. All right, Sandy.
Hi, I'm Sandy. I am a former educator and a pivoter. I also have 5 years in HR where I kind of fell into instructional design before I even knew what it was. And I'm from New Jersey.
Awesome. So great to have you. Linda.
Hi, I'm Linda. I'm in Northern Virginia, relatively new in instructional design. Also, after many years home educating my kids, I'm getting my master's at George Mason University, working as a graduate research assistant there, and as a consultant, helping a company customize their diversity, equity, and inclusion offerings.
Awesome. So great to have you. All right. And next, we are going to have Nicola. And tell me if I pronounced your name correctly.
Yeah, it's Nicola.
Nicola.
Yeah, Nicola. Hi, everyone. I'm from Trinidad and Tobago, but I currently live in Costa Rica. I have 7 years of experience in the sport management field, 4 years as a TEFL trainer and a teacher, and now I am a newbie in instructional design. I'm actually doing a program now, the ADA program, which I will graduate in April. So I'm really excited, and hopefully I will jump into the industry very, very, very soon.
Awesome. Great to have you. All right. And now we're going to have Christine.
Hello, everyone. I'm Christine. I am from New York, and as far as my journey to ID, it has been an interesting one. I originally wanted to teach high school students, more specifically English. Found that it wasn't a natural fit for me. So once I graduated from college, I did and dabbled in trying to find other ways to be involved in the education sector, found instructional design, and I never looked back.
Awesome. So great to have you. And Zoe.
Hey, everybody. I'm from way out west in Arizona. I've been an instructional designer officially for 5 years, but like Christine, I also kind of fell into it. So I've been sort of creating material for a while. I am neurodivergent. I was diagnosed at 27 with ADHD. So that's been a really interesting journey, seeing how memory and attention and emotion regulation, all that fit into training. And it has really opened my eyes to like why I have such learner empathy. I tend to make things very quick and very like narrative because those are just things that work naturally with my brain. So I'm really excited to talk about all this stuff with you today.
Awesome. And I'm really excited for us to hear from that perspective as well. Thank you so much, Zoe. And you're going to have to correct me if I do the wrong stress on the I. Kaya or Kia?
It's Kaya.
Kaya. Okay, great.
Hi, everybody. I'm Kaya. I'm based in Los Angeles, California. I've been working in the learning and development space a little over 8 years now, so I'm a vet in this area, specializing in learning design, project management, program management, learning management systems, and now I do private independent consulting for nonprofits, corporate organizations, and special needs groups.
Awesome. This is a great panel. I'm so excited. And I realized that I never really introduce myself when I do these things. So my name is Nicole A. Harris. I'm the Learning Solutions Enthusiast. And even though I'm hosting this, I'm a newbie myself. I come from public education and I've been in my work for about 10 months. Though it's at a higher ed institution, I work for HR, so we operate more like corporate rather than higher ed. All right, and without further ado, we're gonna get started. Our chat moderators, except for Linda, they're gonna hop off and they're gonna just be with you in the chat. I'm making sure that everyone's having a great discussion, and we're gonna go ahead and get started with chapter 3. All right, so the first question that we have for you guys. All right, we're gonna go ahead and here we go. Chapter 3. All right, so sorry about that. Something's going on with the PowerPoint, but that's okay. I have it here. I'll make sure that you guys can see it pretty soon. All right, so with chapter 3's discussion, there are several questions that we're going to start with, and I'll make sure that you guys can see that shortly. So we know that when people want to break into this instructional design space, we know that a lot of times people focus on getting their PowerPoint together or their Articulate or Captivate file together, and why that's awesome, right? It's awesome for employers to know that you know how to design. Also, what's really important is for new people who want to enter the field to really show that they understand the strategy side, right? A lot of what chapter 3 was talking about, how to properly define learning objectives, how to figure out what is the actual problem, and what are the gaps that people need. All right. So, how do new people who want to begin their journey really show employers the strategy side, or how do you get practice for the strategy side of the job? All right, so you guys can answer that any sort of way. If you're a newbie on this panel, you can tell us some of the things you've been thinking about or what chapter 3 has you thinking about. If you're a vet on this panel, you could talk about the ways that you make sure that you're focusing on strategy. Or if you were hiring somebody, what would you want them to know? So not just the design and the aesthetics, but what would you be looking for? What's really important in light of chapter 3 with learning objectives, defining the problem, and the gaps? Anyone can start.
Yeah, I think for me, as a newer person in this space, find a problem that affects your life and then explore that. And I know that I've been to a couple of these and a couple of like conferences, and someone said, when you are adding projects for your portfolio, it doesn't always have to be something that's going to be for corporate, like an actual corporate problem. It doesn't have to be that. It could be something more interesting. I think I was watching Tim Slade's, and he talked about how he made an e-course for how to cook a turkey for Thanksgiving, So it doesn't need to be something that is applicable to the job that you want to get. It just needs to show that you have the ability and the skills to think through a problem, to figure out what are my learners' gaps when they first come into this course, and what are the objectives, what do I want to teach them? So find something that's a problem for you and then teach others how to fix it.
Thank you. I think that's a really great, because I think we get so caught up in we have to mimic exactly what the work environment's going to be, but there's so many ways to demonstrate that we understand the strategy side. Does anybody else have anything to add to that? If you're a newbie breaking in, how do you show more than just the aesthetic knowledge? How do you show that you understand how to break down these objectives and identify gaps and problems?
Yeah, I have a couple thoughts on that. I'm still a newbie in the instructional design world because I've only been around for 5 years, and I want to eventually get into nonprofit consulting. So I want to be Kaya when I grow up. So I have started just making little, aids for. There's a couple different organizations I've either volunteered with or friends like run it. So I'll hear them complain because people complain about like their day jobs, and so you'll hear somebody like, oh yeah, these people, they're just really not grasping this concept. And I'm like, how many training sessions have you had? One? Do you have any job aids? Would you like some? And so I'll just sort of like most of the work I've been doing right now is for free because it's causes that I care about, and so I'm kind of doing pro bono work, but then I'm taking that work, like the exchange, if you will, is these companies or nonprofits are giving me like permission to include that in my portfolio. So it's mostly been things like that. It's if you have a training event, then think about like how are your volunteers going to access it when they're on the floor. And so I've kind of documented like how those conversations go, because I think a lot of the strategy side of things, people want to know, have you had analysis meetings? Have you done like consulting with your SMEs, stuff like that. So I'll document those meetings, and then I'll display whatever the finished product is on my website.
Yeah, so I have an example as well. I think those are all really great examples. So I come from public ed, and I know that a lot of people are coming into the field from public ed, but I know that's not everybody's story. So I, even in the chat through LinkedIn or even on our panel, I would love to hear if that's not your story of how you got in. But one of the things in my interview, so my interview was pretty daunting. It was my whole team, so like 12, 13 people like in the Zoom, and I was like, oh, hello. And each person, asked a question. And one of the things that they asked me about was about my process. Like, how do I get to the learning? And I was actually able to show them a project I did. So in Julie's book, she uses an example. And even though it's just an example, for me, it's pretty literal. She was saying, like, if the objective, again, was meet me in Africa, that doesn't talk about how you book your trip, where the tickets are, what country out of the 54 countries are you going to, right? And so, quite literally for me, even though that was just an example for Julie, I taught a class called Africa and its Diaspora at the high school level. And I was just told to do this class. So, I'm supposed to cover 54 countries plus all of United States African American history in this time. Where do you start with that? And really, one of the things I had to do was just kind of, one, pull it back. Is our goal really to get to know every single population in every country in Africa? Is it to get to know every language that's spoken everywhere in Africa? Or is our goal to give people who have no familiarity, right, to give them common themes, right, that we can see across the continent while still maintaining that the cultures are distinct, right? And that was how I had to break it down, because if otherwise I would have gotten so caught up in, I got to cover every single every single historical fact of 54 countries, and it would have driven me wild. And I was able to demonstrate to my employer, like, hey, I was able to attack it this way because it just wasn't possible. And even when it comes to proficiency, right? Julie talks about proficiency. There was no way some of these kids didn't know basic things about Africa. So their goal was not to be scholars on every single piece of history. Their goal at that point was to be exposed, right, to just common things. So what do we see culturally? What's the general trajectory that we see that led us to where we are in the United States? So being able to really kind of show your employer that you can chunk things down, that you can actually pinpoint where the learner needs to be. I knew some other teachers in other districts that were saying their biggest struggles, that they're actually trying to cover the full gamut of the history of each country. And they were driving themselves crazy and not getting to their objectives. So what you're doing right now in your field, in your space, even if it's not K-12 education, there's always some sort of goal that you have to attempt where there needs to be chunking taking place. So sometimes we try to separate, like, oh, I don't do anything with instructional design. And that's not true. Like, everybody has a job where you had to get to a certain goal and you had to find strategy to get to that place. Anybody else on the panel for that question?
Yeah, so I think it's really important, really all of you talked about organizing towards accomplishing the goal or the task. And I used to teach how to write robust objectives, and including mental process and content and media of learner performance, in addition to action, conditions and action and satisfactory performance criteria. But what I've found is when you identify the whole task, whatever it is, and you do a task analysis, then the task analysis, the subtasks become the objectives, and whatever that task is. And Nicole, you sorted out, okay, what's realistic, in terms of what we want people to know and do, and Mary and Zoe, the same thing. You figure out, okay, what realistically are the tasks and the subtasks, and they become the objectives. Now, I'm speaking from an instructional strategy, instructional theories point of view, and Julie Dirksen is talking from a learning theory point of view. But ultimately, the two merge. And so it's a matter of saying, okay, what are instructional strategy and design best practices that merge with learning? And I find that, doing the task analysis will keep everybody honest and ultimately will save you. It'll save you and the students, because then they'll be doing learning tasks, and then everything else comes along with it. If they learn the tasks, then everything else, all the objectives, enabling objectives, are accomplished too.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And especially linking tasks to objectives, because it goes back to that ultimate question of what do we want the learner to do? Honestly, if I can confess, I felt very called out by Julie, and I don't know if I appreciated this week. She was talking about those broad objectives, like I want the learner to understand. And so when I read that, I was like, oh, I don't do that. Like, I'm better than that. I don't do that. But then she was like, oh, some people, they will say define and to do that. And I was like, yeah, that's kind of where my speed, I'm all about blooms. And then she was like, well, hello, that still doesn't exactly take you to where you need to be. And then I was like, man, I have to fix that PowerPoint I just did on Friday, but it was so helpful, because I think a lot of the time she even talks about, she doesn't call it conversational, but she talks about how to explain the objective. She talks about the different types of objectives, right? It's not just speaking in our speak. Some objectives are just internal, right? It's for our instructional design team to understand where we need to go, right? They will achieve 80%, whatever. But what does that mean for the learner? So many times, we all know, and Julie talks about it, that first slide that has the objectives, right? Most people skip it. They're like, okay, this is just the cover of the book. Let's go to the real chapters. But it's so important for them to understand a purpose for learning. So I loved her reframe of it. Like, this is your mission. And of course, it doesn't have to be said just like that. It may not be appropriate, but, just talking to them about how important, like actually communicating to the learners, like she kind of talked about in chapter 1 and 2, like they're smart, right? Like actually talk to them about what their task is going to be in a practical, everyday sense. And I also think when it comes to new IDs breaking in, that if you're able to show your employer that I know strategy, you're going to stand out, because unfortunately, even very well established instructional design places don't always follow these best practices. So if you come in, doesn't matter how new you are, and you're talking already about the need for strategy, that's going to make you stand out, I think, like significantly. All right. Anybody else before we move on to the next question for chapter 3?
Yeah, I wanted to add in something really quick. I think everyone's been providing great responses. If you're thinking on a session level or an activity where you're trying to design and create learning objectives that are appropriate. But another level beyond that is on thinking of the curriculum, right? You're not just creating one activity. What are the outcomes of a program? And then how each session basically is helping meet that outcome. So that's something that we always want to think about as well, that you can explain like, hey, I have strategy not only on a lesson level or an activity level, I have it on a curriculum level. I'm looking at what is the current practice of our target audience? What is our desired practice or the competencies that I should see from those learners or how they're performing? What practice gaps that we want to address within that program? There's going to be multiple practice gaps, and that one activity is going to solve that. And then what's the knowledge type of those gaps? Is it knowledge? Is it a competency? It's a performance gap? And how does all those learning objectives, like you said, the task analysis that's within an activity, how to help them, for an example, riding a bike. Well, the outcome is that the student should ride the bike. There's other components like getting on the seat, putting feet on pedals. So there's all these different things that go into it, which would be on an activity level, but also thinking on a curriculum level. What are the gaps that you're trying to close?
Awesome. And I really like what you said about expanding it to the curriculum level, because one of the things she talked about is the proficiency, right? And thinking about the sophistication of your learner. And a lot of times the way that we are designing sometimes is just kind of for the short term, not really because we always want to, but sometimes that's a directive that's given to us, or that's the time constraint, right? So I'm actually going to skip, because of Kaya's comment, I'm going to skip to the third one, then we'll go back to the second one, right? So what does breaking down objectives, identifying gaps, and determining learner proficiency look like in your day-to-day work? And I took out this quote where she said, the fast parts get all the attention, but the slow parts have all the power. So in your own work, or what you hope to do if you're like not in the field directly yet, what does it look like? Like, what's your actual process? Do you sit down with learners? Do you ask the SME certain questions? Do you map it out? I just want everybody on this call, I want to hear their process, and I want us to all learn, because there's so many different types of instructional design and learning experience design. I'm interested in knowing what that looks like in your work, or what you hope it will look like if you're not in the field yet. All right, I'm going to go ahead and start, and then everybody else. I know that's kind of ones you have to kind of think about, right? So I'll give an example of a recent task that I had. I'm still doing it. So it's about quality customer service, and I'm working on it with a partner. So it's my first time working on a course with somebody else. Like, it's an ILT, so it's an instructor led, like it's not online, and the learners will be there in real time with us. And so one of the things that the challenges we have, one, it's an inherited course, so it's already existed for a while. Before we get to, well, the learning is the most important, but I'm just giving you the whole scope. It's old, like just aesthetically old. So that's a big thing that we're having to kind of do, but the learning is the most important. Doesn't matter how pretty it is, right? But one of the things that we are looking at is that it has a wealth of information, like just so much information. And one of the things I need to know is we do these trainings for different customer service groups. So one of my biggest frustrations right now is, okay, this information is great, but what the target that's coming, like, what are they actually doing in their day-to-day work? Like, what does their customer service entail? I don't want to give them general principles about customer service if they don't use this type of customer service in their work. So our courses sometimes are 3 hours, which I know is pretty long. That's just the standard of where I work for ILTs. And so one of the struggles I'm having is, for this particular group, sometimes we have information about the group beforehand, but this one is going to be anyone can sign up for it. So I'm struggling right now because I know that there are specific gaps, but I don't have any learner data. So usually what I would do in that case is the people that have signed up already, I have their information. So I have like their emails and all of those kind of things. So I'm able to send them surveys. I'm able to kind of feel it out before, even though I don't have as much information as I usually would. So just having the information that I have now, it's not what I would like, it's not focus groups, it's not user testing, but I do have a way to communicate at least with some of the people that are signing up, so I can at least gauge. Also, there are going to be people in that course that I didn't get to talk to beforehand. So I'm going to be using a lot of like polls and things in the beginning, so that in the moment I could say, all right, this is the part that I really need to spend more time on. These are the slides that I can kind of go through fast, because I really want to make sure that they have something that they can use practically when they leave here. So that's kind of some of the things I'm personally walking through in my job right now. Anyone else? How do you identify gaps or break down objectives in your day-to-day work?
Yeah, so it's a little bit similar to you. In my job, we're a tech startup, and so I'm in the customer service department essentially. And so first, what I can do is I can look at their resumes and see kind of the history that they're bringing with them. So we sometimes have people from service backgrounds, just like restaurants. Still, they have transferable skills that they can absolutely use in our, for the job that they're doing. Other people are coming from a more technical background, and so they have kind of a higher level that they're bringing to the table, because we are a remote first company. So that's really helpful to see, like, okay, this new cohort, it's more so like customer service, restaurant kind of background. Let me build more the foundational information. Then if I have a cohort that's more technical, then I can kind of have the foundational level touch on it, but I don't have to go as deep into it. And then when I'm trying to see proficiency, what I like to do is I like to, after they've gone through the training, shadow some of the people who were in that training and see how they work. And what I found is that, kind of like what Dirksen was talking about with memory, there are some things that I have taught that I've missed some steps because I thought I knew what I was teaching, and I was like, oh, actually, I missed that step in teaching you it, and I see that you're not doing it because I didn't teach it to you. And then I have to go back and adjust. the training and the way I've taught it, and adjust the information that I'm giving to them, really.
Absolutely. Yeah, that self-reflection is key for sure.
Yeah.
So one of the things that I think about is like for customer service, ultimately you want to identify the real world tasks, the real world type of performance that you want, and then do like role plays and real plays. Well, probably role plays first, and probably with some of the tougher scenarios that customer service reps have to deal with. And so, but for anything, I think the challenge is identifying the real world tasks. I coordinated some leadership training for the Office of the Secretary of Defense. And we had 64 mid-level civilian leaders. And we gave them some very challenging scenarios. We were told what competencies, we were supposed to teach, and and they've got a whole competency progression of competencies for civilian leadership in the military. And we created very difficult scenarios and had them basically role play these scenarios. And so ultimately, it's identifying the real world tasks that you want people to be able to do. And then you need, like Kaya was saying, you need to put those in context of the overall long term. You're talking about the slow skills that Dirksen talks about. You want to put those in context of all of the other skills and accomplishments that people need to be able to perform, and so that ultimately they can do the whole task, so to speak.
Yeah, Max, you were spot on. I remember reading Dirksen, he talks about how we want them to be able to retrieve this information. And in order for them to do that, we have to give them practice retrieving it the way we want them to retrieve it in the real world. So you're absolutely right.
Yeah, there's somewhere. Oh, sorry. There's somewhere in chapter 3 she talks about role playing and talks about the difference between when you're calm and in a classroom versus when you're stressed out and like on the phone for customer service. Because I also worked at a tech customer service company, and I remember all of our facilitators were really nice, and I had a conversation with them where I'm like, you need to be meaner. Like you need to have a couple of role plays where you play an escalated customer, because that's where we see the biggest performance gaps, understandably, right? Because our learners are stressed out trying to deal with an escalated person. So yeah, everything Max said, yes.
Absolutely. All right, guys, thank you all so much. This has started off so robust already. We're going to go ahead right now and look at the last question for this. It's one of the things I said to everybody who's watching right now. I said, chapter 3 and 4 is going to be the hardest to cover, because I know 1 and 2 people were like, we could have went for another hour. And I think that that's definitely going to happen here, but we're trying to be as efficient, but still as like fully covering everything we can as possible. So I'm going to go back to the second question now. So we are all in agreement, right, that all of these things are important. We're not in disagreement. There's none of us that are like, well, maybe we don't have to relook at gaps. Like none of us are saying that, right? We understand that every part's important. But instructional designers, we know, are always concerned with time, right? Deadlines, but practices such as breaking down the objective, identifying the gaps, understanding both sophistication and the proficiency of our learners are crucial. So how do we add these to our practices while still meeting deadlines? What are some ways that we can incorporate these seamlessly, without having to tell our supervisors, or if we work for ourselves, our clients, oh, we're going to need another like 4 weeks on that because, we're identifying gaps or we're deciding this. Like, that's not realistic for us to do. So how do we manage our deadlines while still doing what's best for the learner at the front end?
I deal with this all the time at my job. So I like immediately had a thought. I'm a little blessed in that I work for a corporate training department, so we can sort of tell our stakeholders a little more what's going on. But every training request needed to happen yesterday, and they all want to be able to, order something right away. And we know that we need time to do analysis, and that push and pull can be kind of hard. So I tend to go into meetings and I'll ask, what made you notice that this was a training? Because it might not be a training, but we're not going to tell them that yet because it's kind of a harder approach. And And so, when I hear whatever the cause is, usually I can identify some low lift deliverable. So if they're getting a bunch of help emails about a specific task, I can be like, all right, we'll do a job aid. That's easy. It does not take a lot of my time. So maybe it doesn't need to be a training, but it's not hard for me to do that. And then I lead in soft with, and so then we're going to look at the statistics after this job aid gets released. And, then we'll maybe pull in a few points of confusion, and we'll meet with a few people in a focus group, and I'll sort of very softly and stealthily introduce them to the fact that this might be an ongoing project. And that's a much easier sell because they are getting something quickly that they can take back to their bosses and be like, oh yeah, I met with training. But it gives us a foot in the door to do the analysis that we need to do. So that is usually my strategy at my current job.
I love that example. I really, really do love that. And I even love the reframing it like it's a little bit harder to sell, right? Because again, they're still going to get to the learning regardless of how they get there, right? Well, not like it doesn't matter. The path does matter, but you guys have found a way to frame it to the point where it's more kind of digestible. All right. Anybody else? How do you incorporate this and still be timely in your deliverables?
Oh, go ahead.
No, I'm sorry. For me, I am not quite here yet. I do have a lot of flexibility in my position, but I have an L&D coach, and she talks to me about how my perfectionism can absolutely get in the way sometimes. We may not always be able to create a course that's 100% right now with the deadline, but we do always have the ability to come back and make iterations. I think learning should always be something that is iterative. We can always build upon it, add to it, and increase, the knowledge that we're giving other people and the knowledge that we get from creating this course or this learning material. Yeah.
I think that was
So one of the keys is doing it right the first time. And like, Zoe was saying, and Mary, the point is you need to meet with the stakeholders. And if you can get a majority of the stakeholders and you can get in there and do a task analysis, map out the problem. Okay, what's the problem? And if you can get into what are the causes of the problems, where are the red flags? And then you can do more than just a training needs analysis. You can do a performance needs analysis. And you can say, okay, well, I have a performance model, a little worksheet, and in a half an hour, I can do a complete performance analysis with the stakeholders. But the way you're saving time, it's taking people's time, is having the stakeholders together, because once they start mapping it out, then they'll actually own the solution as well as the problem. And you can say, okay, well, what do we need to do to rectify this? Is it training? Is it resources? Is it more employees? And so that way you can come up with the right solutions initially and not wait and just say, oh yeah, we need training. Well, yeah, training can help, and this will help with, training will help with this, but here's some other things. Be nice if we had some management support. Now that's a tougher one though. So because managers not always, open and transparent. And so anyway.
Yeah, no, I think it's important to shoot for that perfect world scenario, right? Like you want to go in with those expectations and say like, this is what we need if we're going to do this right and with like the least amount of time taken up. Yeah, I agree with that. And the process of educating stakeholders in that can be longer than I wish sometimes. Like a lot of what I'm doing right now, because we're basically a startup, is educating people on like, okay, this is how a training analysis should work. But that requires you to answer my emails. So there's a lot of like negotiation that has to happen. But I think it's really important to keep those goals of like, this is what we want, this is what should be happening in mind, because without that we get sloppy. So yeah.
Yeah, I like that. Without that, we get sloppy. I think as a newbie, one of the things that surprised me, now I'm used to it, is, man, every time we're going to create this, we invite everybody to our meetings. I mean, they're all stakeholders. They matter. Like they're supposed to be there. But I'm just like, this person on this high level in this, and like we do several of them. But I mean, now as I'm growing, I understand why. But it also just makes me think about how I've been doing learning wrong. Like even in K-12, I was like, man, none of this like planning, and teachers have a lot of pressure on them, but like none of this sort of planning is like ingrained in us when we think about learning in general, and that's so important to include everyone that matters in the process. All right, guys. So now we're going to move to audience takeover. So this is where you guys get to ask us questions. And Linda will be sending me some of the top ones that we can all address. Now, from the feedback last week, our communities are always going to be transparent. Some people were like, oh, I really wish we got to the second chapter and talked about it a bit more. So audience takeover is going to be a little bit shorter so that we can make sure that we get to chapter 4. All right. So it's audience takeover time. And you all tell us what you guys want us to talk about in concerning 3 and 4. All right. So let's see. So there's one that says, how does one get themselves an L&D IED coach and mentor? So if you guys don't mind, I'm going to just jump in here. You're in the right place, right? We're not just doing this book club for our health. We love this book. Julie's amazing. But we're hoping that you looking at people in the chat who are consistently giving you information, or some of our panelists, and you're like, networking. And even if some of our panelists don't have the bandwidth for it right now, or I'm sure that we're a helpful community, that someone's going to say, I don't really have the bandwidth, but I actually am connected to somebody else who can, and don't stop trying. Like every week there's at least, because even after the replay, there's hundreds and hundreds of more people that watch it. Like throughout the week, sorry, I'm stumbling on my words. Throughout the week, I'll see people still commenting. So that's like a really, really practical way. I'm sure our panelists have a more like, strategic approach of how to get mentors. But right now you are in the treasure trove of finding people that would be helpful and would love to guide you along. Does anybody on the panel have another approach to how to get a mentor in this space?
So I do coaching and I do workshops on 5-star instructional design certification and lean performance improvement. So, I do that sort of thing. I do some free consultation. So I'd be glad to help.
Oh, that's awesome right there.
Yeah, for me.
Yeah.
Oh, go ahead, Kaya.
I was going to say there's a bunch of groups on LinkedIn that you can join. Find an interest group of instructional designers. There's some on Facebook that you can join as well. And then the Association for Talent Development actually has mentor programs. So if you join their membership, you haven't for that, it's not that much. They have mentorship programs. You can reach out to people in the directory, and it's like across the US. So there's plenty of opportunities to then go to the events, do similar things that you're networking here. And then don't be afraid to DM someone on LinkedIn. My chats are open, so you can message me if you're interested and let me know your interest. And I can try to connect you with people that you would also be aligned with your goals as well.
Yeah, Kaya said everything I was going to say, honestly. But I would suggest when you are reaching out to someone, be specific. Don't just, ask general questions that you could find in the group or with a quick Google search. Ask questions that are specific to you and specific to them. Look through their history, what they're doing, their work history. Look through some of the posts that they've created and shared, and then talk about some of those things and get more information about that.
Yeah, Mary, I think that's a really good point, because it's supposed to be a two-way relationship. So even if they have the expertise, you need to be able to respect their time. You need to be able to make sure, if you say you're going to meet at 12:30, meet at 12:30, and make sure that, if they say they only have once a week to meet, that, are you trying to meet 4 times a week, so there's so many considerations that are just really practical human things that we all know as well. So yeah, and I love the suggestions for ATD and other professional groups on both Facebook and LinkedIn. Even with this book club, a lot of you guys heard about it through a lot of those groups. It wasn't because I'm just so popular. I'm not. It's literally like because of the groups I belong to, of people that are like-minded and want to grow. All right. All right, let's go ahead and see if we have any other ones. All right, so we have another one that says from Aaron, coming in from sitting on a tech product team, I like to approach my deliverables as MVPs or minimal viable products. What provides value and then iterate from there. So many courses I've developed get redesigned every year. What does the panel think about that, right? So the deliverables are minimum viable products. So you think about, okay, I have these deliverables, but for this particular time, what's providing value? And then kind of tweaking from there. Do you guys have that same strategy where you kind of tweak depending on the needs, or do you kind of just churn them out and say, oh, we can use this for this scenario as well? What do you guys think about that? Are you guys tweaking your things as you go or keeping them the same?
I think the rapid prototyping approach is the way to go. And you a couple of you mentioned, put out a minimal viable product, and then maybe you can follow up with more. But by doing the rapid prototype, also the advantage of that is your reviewers will review it a lot sooner, and you'll be able to make corrections sooner. And then if you do it in a format that's easy to revise, then you're going to be way ahead.
And so for anyone that doesn't know about rapid prototyping, so that's not necessarily where the whole thing is fleshed out, right? But you're just kind of giving them sort of a blueprint, right, of what to expect and where it would go. And that also is a time saver as well. All right. Anyone else for this, or any of my panelists want to kind of go ahead?
Yeah, I'll add. I've done some consulting for startups, and the approach for the minimum viable product is very important to have that rapid prototyping, and you're trying to get something out as quickly as possible that meet the goals. With that, I would not necessarily want to keep redesigning, but again, starting, it's going to sound like the same thing, but you want to build it out where you're giving them a piece of it, you're building upon that. You don't have to rebuild with like, all right, we gave them one part of it, that feedback, we can help adjust that, but I also then want to be compartmentalizing that and building on top of that. So we gave them a resource or a community guide, then we gave them something else that enhances their experience with that guide. So it's a good approach when you're about learning and design when you're in corporate higher education as well, so is that you're building something and then you want to build upon it, and that knowing one thing is not going to close or all your practice gaps. You can't just one activity, oh, we solved all the issues, these are going to increase this one activity. This is a great opportunity too to emphasize the appropriateness of the format, the modality that you choose to solve that gap, right? If you have a performance issue and you're doing a didactic, chances are your performance gap won't be closed. So that's also, there's some validation that should always be done when you're designing, and startups are really fun in that way that you do it very quickly, right? It's that quick turnaround, and you are trying to then get feedback and validate whether that intervention or idea was successful.
And another thing to have in mind, there's a 70-20-10 rule or guideline that 10% of your training intervention is the event, 20% is coaching, and then 70% is on the job stretching activities. And it's really important to have that in mind, because otherwise, like Kaya was saying, a didactic event may not make any difference. And so you need to have good hands-on training, then good coaching, and then good follow-up activities.
All right. So, like I said, we're going to we're shortening the audience takeover today. You guys asked some really, really good questions, but I also want to kind of throw out a free-for-all here, and we won't spend too much time on it. But Julie kind of talks about how sometimes there is no problem. And we know that sometimes training is not needed, but she's not talking about instances where training is not needed. She says, some are about taking a nice walk somewhere or getting into shape. Even when the learning isn't a response to a problem, it's likely to be a response to a need or a desire. And when I read that, I was thinking about some of our soft skills, right? Some of our training that people don't necessarily need to take, but they want to. I know in my workplace, we have trainings about resilience. in the workplace. It's not necessary that people use those, or we have emotional intelligence, but people love those classes and they take them all the time. So my question for you guys is, in that case, how do we make these classes valuable to learners? Like these classes that are soft skills that people don't have to take, but it will enhance their work performance. If it's not always in response to a problem, but more of a need or a desire, how do we, increase that value?
It seems so simple, but ask them. I see polls on LinkedIn all the time asking, what type of content do you want? What are you interested in? How can I serve you? I think I saw Kaya post something recently, or maybe it's a week ago, about creating some toolkits on Notion. And I was like, yes, I want more of this information. I'm going to tell you what I want. Please give it to me. They will tell you, but you need to ask your learners. You need to open the floor for them to give you that feedback.
I love that, because you're a partner with them essentially in that case. All right.
Yeah.
Go ahead.
Someone, pardon my pronunciation, I believe it was Kaniqua, a while ago mentioned the WIFM, the what's in it for me, which is like my favorite way to figure out learning objectives. And so that is, we also do a lot of soft skill, non-necessary trainings, a lot of like manager type stuff. And so the way that that gets advertised within our companies, we have newsletters that go out. And so it is specifically like, garner better feedback from your employees, or like, and it's like, here's things that you want, that that we've heard you want or know you want. And so we list like, here's some things you can do with this training. And it's been fairly successful. Again, it's a lot of the soft skill stuff that people have signed up for.
Yeah, I love that. I love actually giving them a path. Like, here's some things that you can do with this. So you're taking it, you don't necessarily need to take it, but here's the options. Here's how it's going to actually enhance what you have. That's really amazing. So we're going to go ahead now and go to the next one. Now we are talking about chapter 4. All right, there's a lot happening on the screen. Let me make sure that that's less happening on the screen. And there we go. Okay. All right. So chapter 4 covered a lot. And in preparing for this, I was like, how do we do this when there's just so much here? So I decided to kind of just make the question broad and just put little points in there from the chapter that can be a point of reference for everybody. So the broad question, this can go in any way, is how should the concept of our brains being like an automated closet with several categories for encoding and retrieval inform our work? All right, so that's super broad. And the types of memory that was talked about was declarative or semantic, episodic memory, conditioned memory, procedural, flashbulb memories. And I'm sure that as we talk about it, we'll kind of define them as we go if you hadn't seen that in the book already. And these are select strategies. Julie talks about a lot. You guys know about a lot more, but chunking, emotional context, storytelling, matching emotional context of learning to the emotional context of retrieval, asking learners to do something with the information. So I just have that on the screen as a reference, but you can take this anyway. I'm going to actually this time, though, start with Zoe, because Zoe has personal experience, was really excited to talk about chapter 4 because of that personal experience. And I think as we talk about accessibility, what Zoe's going to tell us is very important to our practice. So take the floor.
Thank you. Yeah, I specifically messaged you about this part. My secret to trying to figure out how to like teach people to remember things is don't. I do not have good working memory, so I'll remember a class, but like, oh, we talked about this, but like, what steps in what order? So I was working with I think it was it was 2020. I was working with an organization called the Election Defenders, and they had trainings for their volunteers, and it was essentially a lot of de-escalation training, a lot of people's feelings at the polls and sort of how to help them through these things. So and they had good material, but they had 3 1-hour sessions, and they didn't have anything for learners to refer back to. And so what ended up doing for them was creating these mobile job aids. It was essentially just a bunch of images in a PDF. But volunteers could scroll through while they're on the field working with these people. If they're like, oh, I see that situation. Let me just very quickly here's like 4 bullet points to kind of prepare me for like what I'm about to go into. I think it's always really important to train people to use their resources instead of having to train people to remember everything in their resources. Because if there's something that's very easy and quick for them to digest, back to that customer service thing, if they're on the phone with somebody, having to, remember everything that they're supposed to do is much harder than having them, pull up a list and, if they can tie the items on that list back to what they role played in a course, it's going to be able to guide them through things. And it takes that load and that weight of trying to recall things off of them. And then they can just, move through a process much easier.
And Zoe, if you could just take one more minute, because I want to hear from the other panelists as well. But how does your own neurodiversity affect your approach to, because you mentioned that earlier, affect your approach to training and when you think about accessibility? And could you, if you would like to kind of recap what you told us a little bit about in the beginning, in case anyone came in late?
Yeah. So for anyone who didn't see my introduction, I got straight A's in school by creating memory aids for myself, or cramming last minute, or cheating, or reteaching myself material, because the way I learned did not match what I had in school. And then I got diagnosed with ADHD at 27, and all these things make sense. ADHD is poorly named. It is a condition that affects my prefrontal cortex. So that's things like working memory, emotion, time management, a lot of other things besides just attention. So being stimulated by a learning event triggers all these other really interesting things to happen in your brain. And so you end up learning to manage the world a little bit differently than your neurotypical counterparts. So yeah, there's way early on in school, I knew memory was bad. And I didn't know why. But I was like, okay, so memorizing things doesn't work for me. I can kind of cram and very quickly, I think Julie talks about this in her book, you can learn a list that you can regurgitate, but you're not going to keep it. That doesn't hold for you. So yeah, it's all about how do I set, if there's a stressful situation, what's happening is my brain is, okay, this situation has, triggered a host of other things that I am currently thinking about simultaneously. And so having a guide on screen is super helpful, because it's okay. I don't need to sort through all of that and try to find you. I have this guide that I'm working from, and I can devote my resources in my brain to let me control my tone a little better. Let me make sure that I'm, reading this person's voice correctly on the phone, things like that. So I think neurodiversity just makes me a lot about how am I going to practically use this material in the world, because a lot of the traditional presentation modes just don't intuitively have never worked for me. And so I don't tend to think about them in those terms. So if you're lecturing, awesome, cool, great, present them the material. Now what do they do with that? Now let's do role plays, let's do practical examples, things like that.
Awesome. Thank you for that perspective. All right. So anybody else on our panel, that was really amazing. And I think so important for us to, because a lot of times we're making standardized courses. And though we're talking about accessibility, in practice, I don't think we always have the human element. So thank you for sharing that. All right. So anybody else, how should the concept of our brains being like an automated closet with several categories for encoding and retrieval inform our work? So everything we know about memory, right? How should it inform our work? Dr. Crawford?
So this is a chapter about learning science and memory, right?
Yes.
So from the instructional design side, when you provide real world tasks, an application, like Zoe's talking about, guess what? All of these types of memory and all of the selected strategies are incorporated. When you have people, now these need to be meaningful real world tasks that people care about and that are important, right? On the job and in the real world. But by providing real world tasks, real world scenarios, real world role plays, automatically all of these types of memory, all these appropriate strategies are incorporated. And then I worked for a company, we developed Microsoft engineer certification programs. We developed simulations of the network administration and preparing people for tests, for multiple choice tests. But they learned through doing the simulations and they were able to pass the multiple choice test because through the simulations, they learned what they needed to know. And so, it's the real world scenarios, simulations, problems, tasks that incorporate all of these.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Anybody else on the panel? How does
Yeah.
memory affect it? Go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to first just break this down for people who are not familiar with learning science. What's an automated closet? What does encoding mean in retrieval for the learner? So the main thing here is you just can Google right now, information processing system. We're talking about that whole process from the the memory. So you're watching something, right? It's in your senses, to gaining your attention for the short-term memory. So if you completely start to think about what is my prior knowledge, that's that closet. Like, what does this topic relate to that can begin to form schema to understand how can I apply this information? What does it relate to? And then that encoding is understanding the lies and then trying to get that back into your long-term memory, but being organized enough to then go back later and recall that again for another training or recall it in practice. The biggest thing is that we want to help them promote transfer. That is taking the information that they've learned from that session and then retrieving that again and applying it into practice as intended. So that's the biggest thing as instructional designers, and we're thinking about that designing space, is that, again, we're mitigating that cognitive load, not overloading them. We talked about in the book, it's a limit, right? You can't put images that are extraneous, big bodies of text, and expect them to be able to remember what that is and not clearly define definitions and terms as well. So they can't encode it to their long-term memory because you might have introduced topics that they know, but they've never had it introduced to them in that way. So that's the big importance of, like, how do we get that attention? We're talking about trainings that may not be required. The first thing is getting their attention, and you can activate attention by activating prior knowledge.
I was letting that breathe, not because I didn't have anything to say. I think it's really important. So, and I think everything you're saying, prior knowledge and real world task, both of those things are connected, right? Because real world task, that's the environment in which people live, right? And then, of course, when you talk about background knowledge, how do you have that background knowledge? It's based on that environment. I thought it was really interesting in the book when she was saying if someone's going to take a test in a college classroom, where do you think they should study? And, it was like outside, in the trees or whatever. And you would think that it would be like the nice, beautiful environment. She was like, no, they need to study in like a gray windowless place, because when they take the test, it's simulating the environment, right? And of course, that was an example, but it's the same thing. Like, if we want someone to do something on the job, use a new software, they need to actually be in a situation where it's simulated, right? Or where it looks like their job already, so that when they actually have to do the task, their training has already mimicked what they were going to have to do. And I think so often we're like giving them an old way. And, this like slide approach that we have, like technology in and of itself can't deliver good training. Like, we can't say virtual reality, is what's going to solve all our problems. AI is going to solve all of our problems. That's not true. That's just a tool. We have to actually still design well. But I think a lot of the things that we're facing, though the technology itself cannot give us, good training in and of itself, I think we're facing that sort of tension between, however, there is technology that does support, right, the ways that we know that learning is best, and we don't always have access to the tool. So what I'm not saying, oh, if your bosses or whatever don't, they don't support VR AI, you can't apply any of these things. That's not what I'm saying at all, right? But what I am saying is the way that we present information, like even something as simple, she was saying the objectives on that first slide, just kind of there in your face, whatever. Like, do we have to do things the same way over and over again? No, right? So beyond the VR and AI examples, but just in general, like when we're creating our slide decks or whatever, like, are we actually giving people what they need, or we're doing things just because it's always the way that it's been done? Any other final thoughts on these? Anybody in the panel?
Yeah, I was reading the chat, and Tanya Lake, she gave a really good comment. She said, stories are so powerful and probably our earliest learning design back before written language. Humans are built for storytelling and learning through stories. I think that is absolutely very true.
I agree. And I know a lot of the times too, I don't know about you all, but in my design, sometimes I'm like, oh, I'm doing scenarios again. Is that okay that I'm using scenarios again? And it's like, well, stories are the building blocks, but what about the content in the stories? It's not about the fact that you're using it again, right? But are you using it well? Because that is a part of our human makeup. All right. Anybody else before we go on to the last thing? I know we can go on for another hour. Anybody else have anything to add about chapter 3 or 4?
I just really like the learning objectives bit. I have never liked learning objectives, and I remember the first time I read that being like, yes, I feel validated because just those two things, slide of learning objectives versus like your mission, should you choose to accept it, like immediately it makes so much sense. Which one do you feel more intrigued by, right? So just
Absolutely. Absolutely. And so many times we have trainings where people are like, okay, I need to take this because this new software came out and, whatever. But we have trainings where people are literally like, why do I have to take this? And it's our job as designers to have them be able to say, oh, I took this because, to actually help them to connect to it. So I think that that's really important as well. All right, guys. So I know it's 101. If you did hop off, you can hop off, and thank you guys for being, but don't leave yet, because I do want to do a short commercial break. And let me go ahead and turn that on for you all. Okay, so next week, we are not meeting. We're skipping a week, all right, because of an appointment. However, we're going to resume on the 12th. That QR code that you see there is actually, you're able to sign up with an email and send me your email so you can know exactly when the next one is live. So we are doing 5, 6, and 7 next week. Okay, so not 2 chapters, 3 chapters, so that we can still move along. All right. So again, next week we're not going to meet at all. So you can do that QR code, and I think our chat moderators are actually putting a link there as well, so that you can sign up for the mailing list, so that you can I won't spam you. It'll literally just be like, hey guys, the sign up is live. So that's in the chat now. Sandra just went ahead and put that in there. Also, if you liked what you heard, I know, please put come read with me, the hashtag. That's how I find your thoughts and I reshare them. And Zoe gave us an amazing silly picture of reading to the plants. So if you wanted to do that, please go ahead. It's for fun. At the end of these 6 weeks, I want to have a community collage of everyone with their silly pictures of them reading the book. And I'm going to put that together kind of as an artifact for us to have to remember that we were here. So please, it could be your 3-year-old reading the book, your dog, whatever you want, and just send that to me either through my email or through the hashtag as well. This has just been great building in community with everybody. I'm just so amazed, not just that we're talking about this book, but the connections. Earlier in the chat, I saw somebody said, hey, good to see you again. And that just warmed my heart, because that means that there's community being built. Remember, there's a networking tab. And also too, though this is about knowledge sharing, and that's ultimately what it's about in community building, we also want it to have tangible results for everybody, whether you're on camera or not. So if you see someone that is an expert and they had really good, insightful ideas, visit their, page and endorse some skills, right? Any of the co-hosts or the chat moderators, go to their profile and endorse some skills, or even write a recommendation if you like, especially as you're building with people, because we can all help each other elevate our profiles. So I want to thank our panelists today. I want to thank our chat moderators and you. Thank you guys so much. Get to reading 5, 6, and 7. Have a great day, everyone.
Bye, everybody.